So now the final video, we're going to be talking about retaining what we've learned. Now with some things it's of course very straightforward how to do this. So with a practical skill you just put it into practice. Say you've got sleeping techniques, you start doing it as a habit, and over the course of roughly 3 weeks you'll get into the habit of it and it will start to just become normal if it works. However, what about if you have more abstract knowledge? Say you have foreign language vocabulary, or you're trying to memorize concepts from a certain book that you need to retain which aren't so immediately applicable to the real world. Well, that is where this very important method called the method of loci comes in. Now, initially, I was fairly skeptical of this particular memory method. I thought, well, you can use images to represent certain ideas, cringe, and then just sort of went on. But eventually, I actually bought a book called Memorise the Faith by Kevin Vost, and I worked through it. I can't remember if I looked over other stuff first, but besides the point, right? And it actually works. It's extremely effective. It's way more effective than rote memorizing things. I think it's something like double the effect of it, and it's certainly a lot easier to do. However, what I would say is that it's still one of these tasks that's more intensive to achieve. It's certainly more intensive than just reading a book, but it's a lot less intensive than rote memorizing things when you consider everything in the long term. Now, the very first thing that you want to do for the method of loci, sometimes it's called memory palaces, is that you want to pick a place that you're very familiar with, a place that you've walked around at least 6 times, and you want to note that down on a piece of paper. Then, you want to take the concepts from the book that you want to memorize, split them down to the point where they're like a sentence or something that only expresses one idea, and then copy that down and number them. So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. These could be words, these could be concepts extracted from a Platonic dialogue, this could be anything as long as it's something that can be represented by an image. Now you're going to want to start with roughly 10-15 if you've never done this before, but as you grow in this method you can get to more and more and more. In fact, I believe that there are people who have actually memorized entire dictionaries this way. So what you're going to want to do is that for each of these particular pieces of information, you're going to imagine a concept image. Now, ideally, this will be something that's funny or violent or something that sticks in your mind. For example, it might be something that has an object that rhymes with the thing in the concept. It could be something highly violent as well, right? Like, for example, I was doing something called Markov chains in computer science. Now these are basically just chains of states of probabilities. So you've got nodes on a graph and they transition to each other given a probability. Now I had to memorize the concept of a transition probability. So what I ended up doing was, in this particular memory palace that I had, I imagined myself beating Caitlyn Jenner to death with a giant dice, right? Now, you want to choose things that are violent because it will stick in your mind. I memorized this easily, like just over 2.5 months ago now, about that anyway, and it still sticks in my memory. And you want to do this with whatever information you're faced with. Ideally, you will have either lots of freakish movement, it will be something funny, or it will be something violent. And then when you're done with that, you want to place them along a walking journey that you have built through your particular palace. And this journey should have a definitive beginning and end, and you should draw it out. So, say for example, you're trying to memorize the numbers from 1 to 10 in Latin, and you're trying to do it in your bedroom. So what you might do is you might walk through your room, past the bed, up to the bookcase, and then go past the bookcase and jump out of the window. Right? That would be a journey that would contain the numbers 1 through 10 in Latin. So, unus might be the light switch. Duo might be the Xbox 360 next to your next to the pedestal or something like that, right? And you would go through, tres, quattuor, quinque, etc., etc., until you've got all of the things that you need memorized. And as you're doing this, you want to be refreshing your memory in it as well. Like, as you go forth through these, you're probably going to want to imagine them again and again, going through this route until you've finished all of the different loci, or points that you've got. So when you've done all 10 of the initial list, if you've got this on an initial list, you'll probably have gone through 1 and 2 and 3 in the order of you walking around the room a number of times. Now, what you're going to want to do after that is recall this every single day. Now, some people say that you should recall it once a day for a week, and then once every week for 7 weeks, and then once a month for 7 months. But frankly, this is too complicated for me. What I would recommend doing is, at least this is what I do, I don't know how effective this is going to be long term, but what I do is I recall it 5 times a day for a certain number of days until I realise that I've gotten it, and then what I do is I recall it once a day for an indeterminate period of time. I'm thinking I'm going to do it for like a month, right? And from there, it will definitely be ground into your memory, because there's some estimations by a guy called Anthony Mitrivier, who's this memory expert, and he believes that the sweet spot for most people is 25 recollections. But really, I think this assumes that it goes over time. I would do a lot more than that, just to be absolutely certain. And it doesn't really hurt you. You can do this in the shower, you can do this anywhere, you can do it walking along the street. Although it might look a little weird if you're muttering your book to yourself as you're walking down the street. Also, as a side note and a final warning, I wouldn't recommend getting too deeply into some parts of the memory technique, people, because there's a tendency that I've noticed amongst some of them to get involved with more occult and new age style techniques, and you don't want to be involved with them. So what I would do is that I would try and rely on books like Kevin Vost's Memorise the Faith. St. Thomas Aquinas writes about techniques similar to this in his Summa Theologiae, and I'll link a bunch of medieval texts on this in the description. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope that this entire series has been very useful to you, and I'll see you later.